Deonandan from the University of Ottawa. He is an epidemiologist, rejoins us now on 680 CJOB. And Raywat, they're seeing more patients in intensive care units in Spain, France, Ukraine, other parts of the United States. Our Prime Minister issuing that warning really ahead of fall turning into winter as temperatures start to dip and people spend a lot more time indoors. From your perch at the University of Ottawa, as you look at the data worldwide, what are you starting to see?
We're starting to see what looks like the dreaded second wave. We can call it that. I mean, we knew this is where we would be, and we're here. And it's frustrating hearing people deny the facts, but much of the world is seeing if not a resurgence, certainly a reestablishment of the original surge. So this isn't dying down anytime soon. People need to buckle in for the long haul.
Raywat, I realize this may be an incredibly difficult question to ask, but is there any idea of how bad this could get? Anything at all?
Well, it could get really bad if we don't do the right things. If we look at places like India, for example, which is seeing 100,000 cases per day now, Brazil, which is similar, the USA is quickly being outpaced by places like India. Iraq, which never went down, their numbers kept on climbing and climbing and climbing. So it could be, I don't want to use the word apocalyptic, but it's not apocalyptic, but it could be very serious. And right now what we're seeing is an increase in cases, which is troubling enough. We're not seeing an increase in hospitalizations yet or an increase in death, but that's coming. So if you look at France saw an increase in cases amongst the young people, which is what we've been seeing the last few weeks, and then 3 to 5 weeks later, that increase bled over into an older demographic, which led to greater hospitalizations, which led to an increase in deaths. So if we aren't careful, we're going to see the same thing here.
In Ontario, for example, the Premier there, Premier Ford, saying we're going to have the stiffest fines for those people not paying attention right across the country. So there's different tools that are being employed here because everybody wants to avoid shutting things down again. Again, the toolbox has that shutdown, but politicians and the health authorities want to avoid as much as possible to do that because we don't want to go through the spring again. I guess the question is here, from your perch, how will people listen? Without going back to the spring. That's what I fear.
Yeah, people need to listen. And one way to remind them is to remind them what it was like in March and April. It's amazing to me that people have forgotten what that life was like. Hiding in your house, not knowing what tomorrow brings, terrified of a collapsing economy.
Because we're getting used to this with hundreds of cases in Ontario and dozens here in Manitoba. We're willing to put up with that now.
But you're not willing to put up with the deaths that might result from this. So when human suffering starts being noticeable, that's when people will wake up to it. But by then, it'll be almost too late to control it, which is why we're sounding the alarm now. Deaths are a lagging indicator. We've got a couple of weeks, 2, 3, 5 weeks maybe, to stop this before it starts manifesting as deaths. So that's what it might take. Unfortunately, people respond to suffering in their face rather than abstract numbers dangled in front of them.
Raywat, we've heard here in Manitoba, but I'm sure that's been the message across the country and around the world, that officials would much rather resort to education instead of implementing fines. I know that the number of people actually fined for health violations in Manitoba, it's not a lot. It's very, very few. Is the time for education over? Is it time to really bring the hammer down and say enough is enough?
It's a difficult question, and I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that, except to say it's a delicate dance. We live in a liberal democracy, which means people have rights, and it means we have to rely upon the recognizance of individuals to express their freedom in responsible ways. Obviously, that's a naive thing to say in times of emergency. So I don't think it's ever the time to back away from education, but we probably need some harsher administrative penalties like fines, possibly criminal charges if things do lead to deaths in some cases, in order to compel people to understand how serious this is. If you have a speed limit on the highway, we can rely upon people for the most part to obey it. But for those handful that are going to really be reckless, we need to have some sort of penalty for them. That's kind of what we have here. We need a penalty for those handful who are reckless because they will ruin it for everybody.
This is Robert Redfield, who testified at a U.S. Senate Appropriations Subcommittee today in the United States. The director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says masks are the most important public health tool in protecting against COVID-19.
I might even go so far as to say that this face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID than when I take a COVID vaccine, because the immunogenicity may be 70%. And if I don't get an immune response, the vaccine's not going to protect me. This face mask will.
Raywat, comment on that.
Well, he's not wrong in a sense. I mean, you don't need a vaccine if you keep the disease out of your community. And if you can keep the disease out of your community by reducing transmission. You can reduce transmission by distancing and wearing face masks. So that chain of causality leading to high caseload is interrupted with face mask wearing. So he's not wrong. If you want to avoid having to take a vaccine, do these other things to drive the numbers down to single digits, and maybe this thing extinguishes itself in a couple of years. But, people won't do that. So unfortunately, we're going to need technology to step in and save our butts with a vaccine.
And when it comes to a virus like this, Raywat, which, correct me if I'm wrong, this is as contagious as the flu. This virus is going to find a way one way or another. And I don't know how many stories I've heard of people who say, I thought I did everything right, and sure enough, I somehow got infected. So I guess at the end of the day, Raywat, our vaccine continues to be our only and best hope at really stamping this out.
Yeah, I think it is. And by the way, it's probably more infectious than the flu. If you measure it in terms of the number of people that can be infected by it. And it's right. You can do everything right and still get it because not every measure is perfect. I'm fond of saying that let's not make perfect the enemy of good. So mask wearing is not perfect. Distancing is not perfect. Hand washing is not perfect. But if we do all of these things, the risk comes down substantially, but never to zero. The only way to get to zero is to remove the disease from society. You do that by having everyone be immune, preferably via a vaccine. Now, the good news is that we probably will get a vaccine sometime next year. And that's remarkable. It's miraculous. But we need to hang on until then. And we can't be putting people's lives at risk before that vaccine arrives.
Raywat, appreciate the time. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.